Energy is one of the key components, together with feedstock, that makes a difference between being competitive or closing down.
Chemicals industry is at a breaking point. If the European institutions do not take the necessary measures, around 8% of the chemicals industry in Europe is at risk.
Thank you very much to you both, George and Nicola from CEFIC, for joining us on the Blue Nuclear Pod today. That is much appreciated. Now listen, it's been an intense start to the year for the chemical industry in Europe. Actually, last month, CEFIC released its new competitiveness report. Back to that in a minute. And now the European Commission has just published its flagship Clean Industrial Deal. First things first, George, how could this deal affect Europe's chemical sector? What are the big takeaways for you?
First of all, Matthew, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this podcast. Together with my colleague, Nicola Rega, we are joining this discussion from Antwerp, where yesterday the President of the European Commission presented the just published Clean Industrial Deal to around 400 business leaders. It was a very successful event organized by CEFIC. And this reunion actually took place 1 year after the launch of the Antwerp Declaration, which is now signed by more than 1,300 industry leaders. And these people were asking for a European industrial deal and also to put competitiveness on top of the political agenda in Europe. Now, in the press release issued by CEFIC yesterday, we noted that 9 out of the 10 calls of the Antwerp Declaration have been addressed by the European Commission. However, we also stressed that European industries, and chemicals included, are facing huge challenges, and we need this situation to change as soon as possible. And the proposals included in the Clean Industrial Deal, coming now to your question, will be evaluated at the end based on 6 criteria. The first one is, do they keep Europe safe and independent? The second one is, do they reduce energy prices? Also, do they ease the administrative burden on companies? Do they attract investments to Europe? And this is really important because in order to achieve the green and digital transition, we would need huge investments. The fifth criteria is, do they create markets for sustainable products? And finally, do they safeguard quality jobs in Europe? In these 6 questions, we need 6 yes, 6 positive answers. And if there is a single no, then European policymakers have to reconsider and revise the Clean Industrial Deal accordingly.
George, before we go any further, a word on not what this is, but why this matters, because we need to basically tell our listeners what's at stake here for the chemical sector. In your study released a few weeks ago, only last month actually, which is the competitiveness of the European chemical industry, you actually mentioned that this is a sector with 1.2 million direct jobs, no less than 3 to 5 times more indirect jobs, and more than 30,000 companies. So, I mean, how big a deal is this? Why does this matter so much for Europe?
Indeed, these are exactly the numbers that you are mentioning, and worthwhile to stress that the vast majority of these 30,000 companies, around 97%, are actually small and medium-sized enterprises. And these companies are supplying chemicals to key industrial sectors such as automotive, aerospace, defense, and also net zero technologies. And we have to admit that there is no Green Deal without the chemical sector, period. The chemicals industry represents around 7% of the total European manufacturing turnover, and it is also a major exporter with a positive trade balance of around 35 billion euros in 2023. Additionally, the chemical industry is investing around 10 billion euros each year on research and innovation, and taking into account all these numbers, we have to say that the chemicals industry is a very important pillar of the European economy.
Well, thank you, George. No, that really sets the focus for what we're about to discuss. This matters for a lot of people a lot of industries, a lot of economies, a lot of families as well, no doubt.
Correct. Yes, indeed.
But listen, George, Nicola, the message from CEFIC, the message from the Chemicals Industry Association to policymakers in Europe has been very clear, actually, that this is a sector in jeopardy. I mean, we have a real problem here. Nicola, we'll get into energy costs in a second because that's a big factor. But George, it's not the only factor. We're looking at several reasons for this crisis, are we not?
Indeed, Matthew. The very detailed and comprehensive report that we published last month from the competitors of the European chemical industry highlights several reasons for the crisis that we're now facing. You mentioned high energy cost, and my colleague Nicola will elaborate further, but there are multiple other challenges contributing to the sector's difficult situations. These include, among others, of course, regulatory cost of regulation. These have been calculated to be around 20 billion euros per year, which is 2 times greater than what we invest for research and innovation each year. We had also weak demand, and our sector has experienced in 2023 a decrease of the annual average production by around 14% compared with 2021. And overall, in the last 15 years, our industry has become less competitive. The European chemical industry has lost 11 percentage points in the share of the world chemicals market. This is too much. That's why we're asking from the European institutions to take urgent actions to restore the competitiveness of the chemical sector.
Just a rebound question, George, if I may. Why are we seeing such a decline? What are the reasons for this? What could possibly explain the real decline that we've had in Europe so far?
It is actually the very high energy cost compared with our competitors, USA, China. It is the regulatory cost, too high. It is estimated to be around 12 to 13% of the total added value of the sector. Weak demand, all these factors are contributing to what we are calling the erosion of the competitiveness of the European chemicals industry.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, George. And maybe Nicola, if I could switch over to you, on energy, in a nutshell, why are industry's energy costs so high? I mean, what are the pain points for chemical production? Is it electricity? Is it gas? Is it all of the above? What's the problem?
Yeah, Matthew, thanks, and good morning also from my side, and greetings from Antwerp. Indeed, it's a complex matrix of different factors coming together, but fundamentally it all rotates around the impact, direct or indirect impact, that natural gas prices have on European markets, energy markets. Now, why is that? Over the past years already in the US, with the shale gas revolution, there's been a divergence in prices, with the gas prices lowering in the US. Of course, it takes some time to have the impact across the whole spectrum. But fundamentally, they've been experiencing quite a decade of prices which were quite competitive on natural gas. That was not a major issue because energy is one of the main components, but of course there are other areas like market proximity or other factors which don't necessarily make a fundamental switch overnight between one production site over the other. But then with the war of aggression of Russia to Ukraine, that has caused a fundamental shift in the price of natural gas in Europe. We were used to receive natural gas via pipelines, primarily, but I think Russia was at that point contributing for 45% of EU natural gas intake. That had to be replaced, and the number of pipelines existing are quite limited. So we had to replace that amount of natural gas fundamentally with import liquefied natural gas. Now, this has two fundamental issues. One is that there are embedded costs for liquefying and regasifying natural gas, which that creates already a delta in prices. And then, of course, it requires a rebuilding on a long-term relationship with our suppliers. So at the moment, Europe is fundamentally buying on the spot market, and that also adds more volatility to the gas prices. So gas prices have a different layers of impact on our industry depending on which operations are we talking about. It can go from a simple, straightforward element of if one company is using natural gas for energy purposes, then of course that already creates a delta in terms of competitive disadvantage versus the same installation that is, for instance, in the US using natural gas that is much cheaper. Then it has a second layer, and that is because of the impact that natural gas has on the formation of electricity prices. Natural gas is used for balancing the system. It's the fuel which is setting the marginal price. And if we look at what happened over the past years, like if you look at 2019, which was before the COVID, before the war aggression and everything else, we had and we see where are we with the electricity prices today. We see that we have an increase in electricity prices despite we have much more renewables today than 5 years ago. Why is that? Is because again the natural gas has an impact on the marginal price formation. So even if it's lower in volumes, it still has an important impact on electricity prices. And then, of course, being natural gas prices higher because of the LNG dimension, then creates higher electricity prices. So if a company uses natural gas for both heat production and electricity, then it's already hit twice. Then there's also a third dimension in our businesses that are using natural gas also as a feedstock. Then that also has a triple effect. So that is particularly relevant for the ammonia production, which is the lion's share of natural gas use in our sector for feedstock purposes, so what we call non-energy purposes. And that has a triple effect, which makes, especially in these days, production of ammonia in Europe particularly uncompetitive. And we've seen already many layers of closures in this respect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicola. Especially with respect to your last point, that's something which, obviously, from our perspective at Blue Capsule, we're trying to propose a solution to that, notably for the ammonia sector. We'll get back to that in a second to talk about the tech side. However, we actually haven't gone into detail over European climate goals. Now, maybe this is a sign of the current geopolitical context, but in your opinion, is decarbonisation going to slide down the agenda here in Europe? I know the Clean Industrial Deal doesn't see it that way. Does it assuage those fears, this deal that was published only this week?
I don't think the climate agenda is derailed by the new proposals from the Commission. I think the issue is mostly there is a much more understanding today that it's not just enough to draw a line or set a target and then go home and come back after 10 years and expect to be there. There is much more understanding that there is a set of enabling conditions that needs to be rolled out. And there's also much better understanding that most of these enabling conditions are outside of the control of industrial sites. The tools that we have to decarbonize are fundamentally, let's say, not that many. We have electrification is one element. We have carbon capture and storage and potentially hydrogen. But all this require a set of infrastructures that are not depending on industrial side. Then also the volumes of low carbon renewable electricity. Again, it's not the industrial side. So there are a lot of elements that go beyond the capabilities or the willingness of industrial sites. And that really poses the question, if we don't deliver on these enabling conditions, what other tools does industry have besides closing down?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nicola. Yeah. I mean, on that note, I was going to ask you about the you touched on a couple just there, the kind of technological innovations that the chemical industry needs for a low carbon competitive source of energy. And obviously, the reason I ask is that yes, at Blue Capsule, our interest is providing nuclear heat in order to replace gas as a feedstock for the ammonia for the soda ash industries. But there are all sorts of techs that can come into play. I mean, is that right? I mean, you're talking about, for some temperatures, you're talking about more electrification, for instance. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we have, there is a lot of, let's say, a range of options that is out there is quite large, depends very much on the type of industrial site we're talking about, but also depends on geographical situation of these specific sites. We might have two, let's say, hypothetical sites that are identical, but that they need to go for different routes because of the situation in which they are. Maybe there is the need for developing more of one type of infrastructure over the other. We're talking about nuclear. Maybe there is a more or less appetite for nuclear as to be accepted in specific country. There are many elements in there. So the question is really, do we have all the tools on the table that we can say, okay, we go for the most cost-effective solution, but if that doesn't work, what is the second best? And that's where we are now engaging along all sorts of areas, including now coming to your point on nuclear. We are also engaging on with many discussions with the upcoming topic of the small modular reactors to understand a bit better what are the options are there, but also to explain what are the differences in our sector so that we can see whether there are better tailored solutions for different types of businesses within our industries.
Sure thing. Thank you, Nicola. That's very clear. It's a patchwork situation we're seeing, and there's lots of different solutions for lots of different problems. Listen, my final question today, I suppose, Nicola and George, final word for both of you. How can the energy sector help you arrest the decline we've seen the past 10, 15 years in the chemicals and other sectors? What do you need us to do? What do you need to keep Europe competitive and keep jobs secure and communities thriving?
First of all, I would like to mention to what Nicola has very rightly said, that many of these innovative technologies that we are talking here, such as CCUS, are energy intensive. So in Europe, we are going to need a lot of energy in order to apply these innovative technologies. And my concluding point would be that the next 5 years are going to be critical. We don't have too much time available, and we said in our competitiveness report that the chemicals industry is at a breaking point. If the European institutions do not take the necessary measures, around 8% of the chemicals industry in Europe is at risk. So we have to understand the level of urgency, and that's why we're looking in detail to the proposals that have been submitted by the European Commission in the context of the Clean Industrial Deal. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, Nicola.
Yeah, if I can complement what George just said. Fundamentally, for us to remain competitive in Europe, we need to have a business case for investing in these new solutions. Now, the business case comes with two elements. Starting from what George was mentioning, all this transition towards carbon neutrality for our industry requires more energy. And also, all this, what we see up until now is that most of these solutions end up into higher operational cost. Energy is one of the key components, together with feedstock, that makes a difference between being competitive or closing down. And there is a role that the energy sector can play, but this goes into this dual dimension. So to have a business case, we need to have, first of all, a market that is there to buy these low carbon products, which tend to be more expensive. And then secondly, we need to make sure that this market is provided by European producers. Not necessarily exclusively, but at least that there is a business case to create these products in Europe. And that really goes down to what can the energy sector do to help us remaining competitive in Europe. At the moment, SMR seems to be one of the few tools that is out there which seems to deliver lower OPEX, which is a key element for us. The rest is to really find ways of lowering the energy cost in a structural way so that we can ensure that this transition happens by incentivizing investments in Europe and not by importing products from outside of Europe.
Thank you so much, Nicola. George, Nicola, thank you very much for your final word. That was really key. You made some very salient points. So let's keep the discussions going. Let's follow this up, and we're here at Blue Capsule to engage in those discussions in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.